The cemetery should have been empty at dawn.
No voices.
No movement. Just cold air, damp earth, and the weight of names carved into stone. But as Mark Aaron stepped toward his daughter's grave, he heard something that didn't belong there. A child crying. He stopped. At the foot of Avi's gravestone, a small girl in a pink dress knelt in the dirt, shaking with grief. In her hands, she clutched a photograph held so tightly it looked like letting go would destroy her. And in that moment, Mark realized this was no coincidence. Mark had come alone.
No bodyguards.
No phone calls.
No witnesses.
Just a powerful man, a black coat, and the grave of the daughter he buried a year ago. Then he saw her clearly. Mud on her knees. Tears on her face. A child where no child should be. What are you doing here? Mark snapped, crouching down and pointing sharply. His voice carried authority, not concern. Who brought you? The girl flinched, but she didn't run. Slowly, she lifted what she had been clutching. She said she'd come back for me. The girl whispered through tears. She promised. Mark froze. Avi had never mentioned a child. Never mentioned promises. Never mentioned a life he didn't control. And standing there, accusing a crying child at his daughter's grave, Mark Aaron realized something far more terrifying than grief. The truth had been there all along. And he had been blind. If you're hooked, stay with me till the very end of the story. Don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I've got so many incredible stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss any of them. Alright, let's get back to the story. Mark Aaron hadn't planned to stay long. He never did. The cemetery was a place he tolerated, not one he lingered in. A necessary stop. A reminder. He visited at hours no one else chose, early enough that the fog still clung to the ground, late enough that the world felt unfinished. Control mattered, even here. Avi's grave sat exactly where he'd ordered it. Polished stone. Clean edges. No flowers left by strangers. Just her name, carved deep and permanent. Proof that some things, once taken, never came back. He stood there in silence, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight.
No tears.
He'd shed those months ago, alone, where no one could see them. Then the sound reached him again. A small, broken sob. Mark turned sharply, irritation flashing before confusion could catch up. The girl was still there, kneeling close to the gravestone, her body folded inward like she was trying to disappear into the earth. Her shoulders shook as she cried, and she pressed the photograph to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "This isn't a playground," Mark said, his voice cutting through the air. "You don't belong here." The girl startled at the sound, sucking in a breath like she'd been struck. She looked up at him with red, swollen eyes, fear written plainly across her face. But she didn't stand, didn't run. She stayed exactly where she was, fingers tightening around the photo. Mark stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. From this distance, he could see dirt under her fingernails, a tear streaking a clean line down her cheek. Something about the way she knelt, careful not to touch the stone too roughly, made his chest tighten in a way he didn't appreciate. "Who brought you here?" he demanded. "Tell me." The girl swallowed. Her lips trembled before she spoke. "I came by myself." Mark let out a short, humorless breath. That's not an answer. Children don't wander into places like this on their own. She glanced down at the grave, then back up at him, as if checking that the name was still there. "I wasn't wandering." The certainty in her voice caught him off guard. He crouched down to her level, finger lifting, pointing without thinking. The gesture was instinctive, commanding, accusatory. The same one that grown men lower their eyes. "You don't come to my daughter's grave without a reason," he said quietly. "So start talking." Her eyes flicked to his hand, then to his face. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the photograph toward him. It shook in her grasp. I just wanted to see her, she whispered. She said this was where she'd be if anything happened. Mark's breath hitched before he could stop it. Avi's face stared back at him from the worn photo, smiling.
Alive.
For the first time since he arrived, Mark Aaron felt something crack beneath his feet. And the grave, the one place he thought he owned completely, no longer felt empty at all. Mark straightened slowly, the photograph still burning in his mind like a bad echo. His first instinct wasn't sympathy. It was suspicious. In his world, nothing appeared by accident, especially not grief at the exact place it could do the most damage. Who put you up to this? He asked, voice low and sharp. Miller blinked at him, confusion flickering across her face. Put me? Don't play innocent, Mark said, the edge creeping back in. People use stories. They use faces. And they use children when they want leverage. He gestured toward the grave. That photo didn't fall into your hands by chance. The girl's lips parted, but no words came out. Her fingers tightened around the photograph until the paper bent. Mark paced once, then stopped in front of her again. Did someone tell you to come here? He pressed. Did someone say my name? Her eyes filled, overflowing this time. Tears spilled down her cheeks unchecked. No, she said, the word breaking in half as it left her mouth. I just wanted to see her. Mark scoffed quietly. You expect me to believe that? That did it. Miller's shoulders collapsed inward, as if the strength holding her upright had finally given out. She folded forward, hugging the photograph to her chest, sobs tearing out of her in uneven gasps. They weren't quiet tears anymore. They were loud, messy, desperate. Nothing rehearsed about them. I didn't do anything wrong, she cried. I didn't mean to make you mad. I just miss her. The sound hit Mark harder than he expected. It wasn't the cry of a child caught in a lie. It was the cry of someone cornered by loss, someone too small to carry it alone. She said she'd come back. Miller went on between sobs. She always came back. Even when it was late. Even when it was raining. She never missed a promise before. Mark felt his jaw tighten. You keep saying that, he said. What promise? Miller shook her head fiercely, tears spraying. You don't understand. She didn't talk like other grown-ups. She listened. She didn't look at me like I was something broken. Her voice cracked completely. She said she wasn't scared of bad people. She said she could fix things. Fix things. The words landed heavy. Uncomfortable. Mark looked down at the girl kneeling in front of his daughter's grave, clutching Avi's picture like a lifeline, and felt anger twist into something sharper, something closer to fear. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but the conviction was slipping. My daughter wasn't involved in whatever story you're telling yourself. Miller looked up at him then, eyes red and blazing with hurt. She saved me, she said simply. And now she's gone. The accusation hung between them, not spoken by Mark this time, but felt all the same. And for the first time since Avi died, Mark Aaron wondered if the lie he'd been living with wasn't about her death at all, but about how little he truly knew the person she had become. Mark reached out before he realized he was doing it. Let me see that. Miller hesitated, instinctively pulling the photograph closer to her chest, eyes flicking to his face like she was bracing for it to be taken and never returned. When she didn't move, Mark softened his voice. Only slightly. I won't keep it, he said. I just need to look. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she extended the photograph toward him. The moment Mark took it, his breath caught. It wasn't a posed picture. No studio lighting. No careful smile for family albums. Avi sat on the edge of a worn park bench, knees pulled up, coat draped loosely over her shoulders. She was laughing, really laughing, the kind Mark hadn't seen since she was a child. Her head was tilted toward the girl beside her, arm wrapped protectively around Miller's small frame. Miller leaned into her without hesitation, eyes bright, cheeks smudged with something that looked suspiciously like ice cream. They looked familiar,
Easy.
like they belonged in the same moment. Mark's grip tightened on the photo. That was the day she taught me how to skip stones, Miller said quietly. Her crying had slowed, reduced to shallow breaths. She was bad at it. She kept throwing them too hard. A small, broken smile flickered. She laughed every time they sank. Mark swallowed. Avi hated being bad at things. She hated even more when she couldn't laugh at herself. Yet there she was, caught in a moment he'd never been invited into. When was this taken? He asked. Last spring, Miller replied. She said it was important to remember days like that, in case things changed. Mark's chest tightened. Changed how? Miller shrugged, eyes drifting back to the grave. She got quieter after that. Still kind. Still warm. But quieter. Like she was thinking all the time. She hesitated, then added. She told me not to worry. That she had a plan. A plan. Mark studied the photo again, noticing details he'd missed before. Avi's coat was dusty at the hem. Her hair pulled back hastily, like she'd rushed to be there. This wasn't a visit squeezed between obligations. This was time she'd carved out deliberately. You weren't just someone she visited, Mark said slowly. Miller shook her head. She said I was her reason. The words landed with brutal clarity. Mark lowered himself onto one knee without realizing it, the photograph still between them. The grave loomed behind Miller, Avi's name etched into stone, cold and final. Yet the girl before him spoke of her like someone who had been present, who had shown up. She brought me books, Miller continued, and soup when I was sick. She stayed when I had nightmares. She said everyone deserves at least one person who doesn't give up on them. Mark felt something inside him fracture. Avi had given that to this child. Quietly.
Completely.
Without asking permission. And standing there, holding proof of a life his daughter had lived beyond his reach, Mark Aaron understood something devastatingly clear. Whatever Avi had been protecting, she had cared enough to risk everything for it, including her life. Mark remained where he was, the photograph heavy in his hand, as if it weighed more than paper ever should. The cemetery felt different now. Not quieter, charged. Like the ground itself had shifted beneath him. You shouldn't talk about her like that, he said at last. You didn't know her the way I did. Miller didn't argue. She never raised her voice. She just looked at him with an expression that was too old for her face. I think I knew a part of her you didn't. The words cut deeper than he expected. Mark stood and turned away, staring at the rows of headstones stretching into the mist. Avi had grown up surrounded by protection, wealth, silence. Anything she needed, she had asked for, or so he believed. He had given her distance, thinking it was freedom. He had given her safety, thinking it was love. She didn't tell me about you, he said, more to himself than to Miller. About any of this. Miller nodded. She said some people couldn't know. Not yet. Mark's jaw tightened. Why? She said they wouldn't understand. Miller hesitated, then added softly. She said they might stop her. That made him turn back. Stop her from what? Miller looked down at the grave, fingers brushing the carved letters of Avi's name. From helping. The word echoed uncomfortably in Mark's mind. Helping. It wasn't a word that belonged in his world. Problems were handled. Threats were removed. Debts were collected. There was no room for quiet kindness, for small acts done without recognition. What kind of help? He asked. Miller shifted, clearly unsure how much to say. She met people who were scared. People who didn't have anywhere else to go. She said they got lost between important men and dangerous plans. Her voice dropped. She said that was where bad things hide. Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine. Avi had always asked questions.
Too many, sometimes.
About money. About where it came from. About people whose names were never spoken at the dinner table. He had brushed it off as curiosity, youth, rebellion that would pass. It hadn't passed. She told me not to be afraid of power, Miller went on. She said power only works if everyone agrees to be afraid of it. Mark closed his eyes briefly. That was Avi's voice. Her quiet defiance. Her stubborn belief that the world could be nudged, piece by piece, toward something better. When did she start doing this? He asked. A long time ago, Miller said. Before I met her. Mark exhaled slowly. He thought of the late nights, the unexplained absences, the arguments that ended with Avi walking away, disappointment etched into her face. He had assumed she was ashamed of him. The truth was worse. She hadn't been ashamed. She'd been resisting. Standing there, Mark understood that Avi hadn't just lived a life separate from his. She had lived one in opposition to it. Quietly, carefully, knowing exactly what it might cost her. And suddenly, her death no longer felt like a tragic accident. It felt like a consequence. Mark felt the weight settle fully now, pressing against his chest with every breath. The photograph, the words, the quiet certainty in Miller's voice. None of it felt abstract anymore. It felt pointed, directed. Did she ever mention names? He asked carefully. Too carefully. Miller looked up at him, startled by the change in his tone. She studied his face for a moment, as if measuring how much truth it could withstand. Then she nodded.
There was one, she said.
She told me to remember it, in case something happened. Mark's pulse thudded once hard. What name? Miller hesitated, fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. She said it wasn't supposed to sound important. That's why people ignored it. Mark's stomach tightened. In his world, the most dangerous things were always hidden behind ordinary names. Say it, he urged. North Point, Miller said quietly. She said that was where everything crossed. The word hit him like a blow. North Point wasn't just familiar. It was foundational. A logistics company. Clean on paper. Invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Mark had approved its creation years ago, barely glancing at the details. It moved shipments, laundered money, smoothed paths that needed smoothing. He hadn't asked questions because results had come quickly and cleanly. He'd never questioned the name. That's impossible, he said automatically. You must be mistaken. Miller shook her head. She showed me the logo. A blue triangle. She said if I ever heard that name again, I would be scared. Mark's hands curled slowly into fists. North Point's logo was a blue triangle. He turned away, anger flaring sharp and immediate, but it had nowhere to land. Not on Miller. Not on Avi. It doubled back on itself, burning deeper. Avi hadn't stumbled into danger. She'd followed a trail. How did she know? He asked, voice low. She listened, Miller said. She asked questions other people didn't want to answer. She said bad things don't stay hidden forever. They just get protected. Mark swallowed hard. He thought of the meetings he'd half paid attention to, the reports he'd signed without reading, the men he trusted because they never brought him problems, only solutions. Avi had seen what he refused to look at. She told me if anything happened to her, Miller continued, her voice trembling now, that it wouldn't be because she was careless. She said it would be because she got too close. The cemetery felt unbearably still. Mark stared at Avi's grave, the stone suddenly less a marker of loss and more an accusation. North Point, a name he'd treated as harmless infrastructure, had become the line that led straight back to him. He had built an empire by never asking the wrong questions. And his daughter had died asking the right ones. For the first time, Mark Aaron understood the full shape of his failure, not as a father who wasn't present, but as a man who had created the very shadow his daughter had tried to step into with a light. And now, that shadow knew Miller's name. Mark's gaze drifted back to the photograph in his hand, then to the grave, as if expecting Avi to contradict what had just been said, to laugh it off, to step out from behind the stone and tell him this was all a misunderstanding. She didn't. Miller shifted closer to the grave, careful, reverent. She didn't want me to be scared, she said softly. Not at the end. Mark's throat tightened. The end of what? Miller hugged her knees, drawing them close. The waiting. That single word hollowed something out inside him. She told me she had to go take care of something important, Miller continued. Something she couldn't explain yet. But she made me promise not to cry. Her voice wavered. She said she'd be back before I even noticed she was gone. Mark closed his eyes. He could picture it too clearly. Avie crouching to meet a child's eyes, choosing her words carefully, smoothing fear instead of passing it along. Avie had always done that. Absorbed the worst of things, so others wouldn't have to. When was the last time you saw her? He asked. Miller didn't answer right away. She picked at a loose thread on her dress, unraveling it slowly. The night before, she said. She came late. Later than usual. She looked tired, but she smiled anyway. Mark's breath stuttered. The night before. His mind raced back to that evening. Avie had said she was busy, that she'd call the next day. He hadn't pressed. He never pressed. She sat with me for a long time, Miller went on. Longer than she ever had. She brushed my hair and told me stories about when she was little. About sneaking candy when she wasn't supposed to. A faint, sad smile crossed her face. She said she wished she could do things differently. Mark felt the weight of that sentence fully. She promised me, Miller said, voice cracking now. She held my hands and looked right at me and said, no matter what happens, I'm coming back. Silence stretched between them. I waited, Miller whispered. I waited all night. And the next day. And the next. Her shoulders began to shake again. Then people started saying she was gone. But I knew they were wrong. She wouldn't leave without telling me. Mark felt his knees weaken. He lowered himself onto the cold stone bench beside the grave, the promise echoing in his head. No matter what happens. Avie had known. She had known the risk, the danger, the cost, and still she'd made that promise. I came here because she said if anything ever happened, Miller said, tears spilling freely now. This was where I'd find her. She said she didn't like goodbyes. Mark stared at Avie's name carved into stone, the finality of it unbearable. Avie hadn't broken her promise because she didn't care. She'd broken it because she never got the chance to keep it. And standing there, listening to a child mourn the return that never came, Mark Aaron understood something devastatingly simple. His daughter had gone out into the darkness believing she would come back, and he had been too blind to stop her. The pieces finally aligned with a clarity that made Mark's stomach turn. It wasn't sudden. It crept in slowly, cruelly, as understanding replaced denial. The late-night meetings Avie never explained. The names she avoided saying out loud. The tension in her voice during their last argument, when she'd asked him, quietly, carefully, what North Point really moved. He'd dismissed it. Now he couldn't. After she stopped coming, Miller said, her voice small, things changed. Mark looked at her sharply. What things? The men, she replied. They started watching me. The words settled like lead in his chest. They didn't wear uniforms, Miller continued. But they waited near the building. They asked questions they already knew the answers to. She swallowed. Avie told me not to talk to them. She said if anyone ever mentioned North Point again, I should leave and find somewhere safe. Mark felt cold spread through him. Did they hurt you? He asked. Miller shook her head.
No.
They said they were waiting for her. The cemetery seemed to recede, the world narrowing until there was only that sentence echoing in his mind. Waiting for her. Avie hadn't been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had been targeted, tracked, pressure. And when she didn't back down, she had been removed. Avie told me she could fix it, Miller went on. She said if she talked to the right people, if she showed them the truth, they'd have to stop. Mark let out a broken sound that might have been a laugh if it didn't hurt so much. The right people. The truth. Avi had believed systems still worked if you pushed hard enough. She said she wouldn't let them take me, Miller whispered. She said she'd protect me. Mark's hands trembled as he clenched them. Protect me. That was the moment it clicked fully into place. Avi hadn't been running from danger. She had been standing in front of it. When did you last speak to her? He asked, though he already knew the answer. The morning she died, Miller said. She called me and told me not to worry if she didn't come back right away. She said she was going to make sure everything ended. Mark's breath left him in a rush. Ended. Not escaped. Not delayed. Ended. He pictured Avi alone in her car, driving toward a meeting she knew might be a trap. Carrying evidence. Carrying conviction. Carrying the weight of a child who trusted her completely. She didn't go there for herself, Mark said hoarsely. Miller shook her head. She went because of me. The words shattered whatever illusion he had left. Avi had died doing what Mark never taught her. Choosing someone weaker over her own safety. Choosing resistance over obedience. Choosing to protect instead of dominate. Mark lowered his head, grief finally breaking through the rigid control he'd clung to for so long. His empire had demanded silence, compliance, distance. Avi had answered it with defiance. And now, standing beside the girl his daughter had died to protect, Mark Aaron understood the most brutal truth of all. By the time he learned what Avi had been fighting for, she was already gone. And the cost of that ignorance would never leave him. Mark felt it before he saw it. The subtle shift in the air. The quiet way around the cemetery no longer felt empty, but watched. Years of surviving had trained him to notice those things, the pauses that lasted too long, the absence of random noise where it should have existed. He straightened slowly, eyes scanning the perimeter beyond the rows of stones. Did anyone follow you here? He asked. Miller stiffened. I don't think so. That wasn't an answer that brought comfort. Mark reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, not to call anyone yet, just to feel its weight in his hand. His instincts were screaming now, louder than grief, louder than guilt. If Avi had died protecting this child, then the danger hadn't died with her. It had simply waited. Miller wiped her face with the sleeve of her dress. They don't like it when I talk about her, she said quietly. Mark looked at her sharply. Who doesn't? The men who ask questions, she replied. They always say I remember things wrong. They say children make up stories. His jaw clenched. What kinds of questions? Miller hesitated, then spoke as if reciting something she'd been told to forget. They ask where she took me, who she met with, what she said before she left. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. One of them said I was dangerous because I listened too much. Dangerous. A child. Dangerous. Mark felt anger surge, hot and focused. Did you tell them anything? No, Miller said quickly. Avi told me not to. She said if I ever felt scared, it meant I knew something important. The cemetery gates creaked faintly in the distance. Mark's gaze snapped toward the sound. A car passed on the road beyond, too slow for his liking. His hand moved subtly, positioning himself between Miller and the open path without thinking. You shouldn't be here, he muttered, not to Miller, but to himself. This place isn't safe anymore. Miller looked up at him, fear flickering across her face. Did I do something wrong? The question hit him harder than any threat ever could. No, he said immediately, more force than necessary. He softened his voice. You didn't do anything wrong. But someone else believed she had. Mark finally understood what Avi had seen long before him. Miller wasn't just a child who'd been helped. She was a witness. A loose end. Proof that Avi hadn't acted alone, and that her silence hadn't been enough. You remember things, Mark said slowly. Things they don't want remembered. Miller nodded. Avi said that's why they were scared of me. Mark exhaled through his nose. Fear makes people careless. Fear made them violent. His phone buzzed in his hand. One message. Unknown number. She's not as invisible as you think. Clean up the problem before it grows. Mark's blood turned cold. He looked down at Miller, small, exhausted, standing in the open with no idea how many eyes were suddenly on her. How many calculations were already being made. Avi had shielded her with courage. Now all that stood between Miller and the people closing in was a man who had once built the very system hunting her. And Mark Aaron realized, with chilling certainty, that the child beside him didn't know too much by accident. She knew too much because Avi had trusted her with the truth. And truth, in Mark's world, was never forgiven. Mark stared at the message on his phone until the words blurred, then locked the screen and slipped it back into his coat. He didn't want Miller to see his face right now. Years of control had taught him how to hide fear, but this was different. This was the kind of fear that came with clarity. He looked down at the girl standing beside him, her shoulders drawn in, her eyes searching him for answers he hadn't yet decided how to give. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. Miller hesitated.
8.
Almost 9. 8 years old. And already marked. Mark turned toward Avi's grave one last time. The stone felt smaller now. Less like a monument and more like an accusation carved into marble. He had given his daughter everything he thought mattered: money, protection, distance from danger. What he hadn't given her was presence. He hadn't listened when she asked questions. He hadn't pushed when she grew quiet. He had mistaken silence for safety. Avi hadn't needed a powerful father. She had needed an attentive one. "I thought keeping my world separate from yours was how I protected you," he said softly, not sure whether he was speaking to Avi or to himself. "I thought if you didn't know how things worked, they couldn't touch you." Miller watched him carefully, as if afraid he might disappear too. "But you knew," he continued. "You saw it anyway. And instead of turning away, you stepped into it." The realization hurt more than grief ever had. Power without presence. Authority without understanding. He had ruled everything except the one place that mattered most. Mark crouched down in front of Miller, bringing himself to her level. He noticed how she tensed at the movement, then forced herself to stay still. Trust, once broken, didn't rebuild easily. "They're right about one thing," he said. "You are important." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're important because you know the truth. And because my daughter believed in you enough to protect you with her life." Miller's lips trembled. "Does that mean I'm in trouble?" Mark shook his head. "It means you're not alone anymore." The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth. A promise, not a command. He stood and extended his hand to her. Not forcefully, not urgently, just there. For a long time, he said, "I thought being strong meant making sure no one needed me, that they stayed out of the way. Avi proved me wrong." Miller looked at his hand, then at his face. Slowly, she reached out and took it. The contact was small,
Light.
but it anchored him in a way nothing else had. "They'll keep coming," Mark said, his voice steady now. "Because of what you know. Because of what Avi tried to change." Miller swallowed. "Are you scared?" Mark considered the question honestly. "Yes," he said, "but not of them." He looked back once more at the grave, at the name that had changed everything. "I'm scared of becoming the man who lets her sacrifice mean nothing." He turned away from the cemetery, guiding Miller with him, already planning, already calculating, but for the first time, not for power. For protection. For presence. For the daughter who had shown him, too late, what being a father was supposed to look like, and for the child who would not pay the price for his blindness again.